Pastor Nathan's questions. I was also reviewing many of my own serious questions and doubts about life and spirituality. It was a thrill to see the world through Pastor Nathan's searching and benevolent soul. I purposely wanted a preacher to have some of the same qualities as Jesus, the Dalai Lama, and other great religious leaders, and to be perplexed with doubt. The challenges to the pastor's faith are not unique. In focusing in on a pastor who openly questions his own purpose, it is my goal to help people to use a lens of intellectual honesty when thinking about all matters spiritual. There is much cognitive dissonance and doubt that exists in the leaders of churches around the world. Like the book's protagonist, I think modern religion has too many rules. We cannot, as best-selling author Paul Young once said, put God in a box. My main character encounters a change in perspective as he experiences hardships within the confines of organized religion in the Lutheran Church. The pastor finds his own way with Unitarianism, which he senses is a warmer house of God with less rules, more tolerance and more personal meaning. He disagrees with the concepts of hell and Armageddon and has some serious doubts about the concept of original sin, and that makes many in his Lutheran family very uncomfortable. Pastor Nathan differs from most Christian ministers, in that he believes that most people are good. He has a talk with his friend Johnny about little babies having no innate sin, that they are blank slates with so much potential. Original sin to Nathan seems to go against common sense. Yet the minister remains a bit of an enigma because he still has great respect for the loving character and teachings of Jesus Christ. As we learn at the end of the book, he even surprises us by conceiving of him as a kind of savior. Our pastor finds a home in Unitarianism as he opens his mind to many different ways to have faith and to worship. His profound doubts lead him to a more liberal faith, where he lets go of rigid beliefs such as the belief that Jesus is God and the Bible is the only word of God. Unitarians believe that Jesus was inspired by God in his moral teachings but was most likely a human being instead of a sacred deity. Unitarianism is also known for the rejection of several other Western Christian doctrines, including the doctrines of original sin, predestination, and the infallibility of the Bible. The pastor is a victim of a drifting sense of doubt, which affects him greatly. The book doesn't have a flashy storyline or action-packed sequences with a mass appeal but contains deeply philosophical and ethical ideas which I have attempted to integrate into the text. That, I believe, is the real power and possibly controversy of the work. I wanted the pastor to go to battle with his faith on a number of levels, and hopefully I have succeeded in this. Another element of the story is that Nathan is suppressing his high level of anger at God largely because of his failed relationship with his first wife, the tragic death of Leanne, tragedy involving his autistic son, and his inability to fully connect with his congregation. These heavy doubts subconsciously manifest themselves strongly as our protagonist struggles greatly to keep hope and faith alive in some way, shape or fashion. There are certain authors the pastor is hesitant to read, like Christopher Hitchens, because such actions could cause confusion or significantly threaten his cocoon of faith, subtly usurping his religious worldview. With this in mind, I thought it would be extremely interesting to write a book centering around the doubts of a pastor who battles with this high level of skeptical inquiry and cognitive dissonance. Using Pastor Nathan Simone as an example of this spiritual confusion, I attempt to illuminate the idea that both shepherds and sheep are many times walking in the dark, yearning to find the perfect path, the perfect spiritual direction in life. I tried to show that faith is always an awkward leap, and that life must be fully lived and not merely meditated upon. I believe that we are all trying to bring light to our own lives with love and truth in our own special ways. Perhaps we all are, as the Bible states, looking through a glass darkly. The pastor comes to find that love and truth are the most important things in life, that it all starts there, regardless of the rules and guidelines that organized religion imposes. He realizes that God wants him to build his own foundation based on these values. It is each of our individual responsibilities to bring our best selves to this great passion play called life. As Shakespeare once stated, life is a stage and we are merely players upon it. Perhaps a psychiatrist or any of my keen readers may observe that Nathan lacks a sense of personal connection in his life and possibly owns a touch of neuroticism or paranoia. That may be unusual and unhealthy for a minister who interacts with hundreds of people on a regular basis, making his job extra difficult. Our main character also undergoes a somewhat peculiar personal transformation throughout the novel, and it is my hope that the reader will be able to relate to many of the pastor's heartfelt, earnest, and uniquely philosophical questions. In the book, I have the pastor encounter four visions. One is the ghost of Christopher Hitchens, who represents the concept of truth. Hitchens, as an interesting and compelling manifestation of God, tells Nathan that the big picture is much larger than he may imagine and that he is on the right path, that the searching path is often the best and most honest path. The Hitchens character unveils God's intention to welcome the multitudes, a rainbow of free thinkers. He is encouraged to love humanity, with all of its frailty, because of its amazing potential for growth. He unveils that God is not a God of hellfire but a God of infinite compassion and love. The Spirit reveals that there is no hell and that he doesn't want Armageddon to be true. He shows that God's main power is not fire, but everlasting love and namaste. He also says some things bordering on the humorous, outrageous or bizarre, similar to George Burns' character in the movie Oh, God. The ghost tells Nathan that if Christ comes back, he will probably come back as an autistic woman, adding that God wants to try something new. He also says that some free-thinking atheists can be ethically superior to Christians. God, through the Hitchens ghost, is cheering for mankind to figure out the answers before it is too late. He even explains social Darwinism to Nathan as one of mankind's biggest misconceptions. He says politics and science, when combined in some ways, can be dangerous. As a spokesperson for God, the Hitchens character tells us that evolution is mostly true and that some folks, like the Answers in Genesis crowd, have it completely wrong when they demonize the concept of evolution. He encourages Pastor Nathan that if he focuses on his goals and purpose, that his intelligence will increase fivefold. Showing Christopher Hitchens as God may show to the reader that if a supreme being exists, he or she is infinitely more complex and abstract than we are able to begin to fathom. I thought it would be powerfully poignant and interesting for the God ghost to be speaking through one of the most articulate atheists of our time. The second vision/ghost Nathan sees is in the form of the late author and speaker Leo Buscaglia, representing the concept of love. The phantom attempts to teach the pastor about the joy of the moment and wants to help Nathan appreciate love in all his experiences. The Buscaglia scene represents the Buddhist teaching of the appreciation of the moment and the opportunity to love. He admonishes Nathan to risk it all on love. The ghost is seen playing with leaves at a Target store, the leaves symbolic of death. The ghost teaches Nathan about the urgency to do the important things in life now. One of best-known books from Buscaglia was a children's book about death called The Fall of Freddie the Leaf. The Leo character urges Nathan to be more confident in himself and confident in the potential for love all around him, wanting him to open his heart to love in all ways. The ghost says things that are quite in line with actual motivational quotes from the late Mr. Buscaglia. The third vision also comes in the form of a dream. Pastor dreams about a hypothetical trial between love and truth. The moral lesson that this very strange dream attempts to teach is that love and truth must combine with grace in order to produce harmony and wisdom. The third spirit is the judge, in the form of the late Robin Williams. He attempts to teach Nathan that while he is alive, he must never lose sight of the incredible power of love. He wants him to grasp that truth is much more profound and beautiful than one can imagine. The spirit poignantly admits that in real life, he should not have committed suicide and states he is profoundly sad when any human being decides to end his or her own life. The theme of suicide ideation comes up twice in the novel, one with the scene of the young man who attempts to do away with himself at the local mall. The other manifests in the character personified by Williams, who poignantly and very modestly tells Nathan that there is always hope and that he now knows that suicide is never the answer. He tells our main character that hope always exists in the sacred nature of relationships and the potential love we have in our many connections with one another. It is our responsibility as human beings to unlock this love and meaning. He tells Nathan that he has a great opportunity to show the world what love is, and that he can express this in a creative and wonderful way. Our pastor is told that there is still time to find more love and to figure things out. The fourth vision appears again at the Mars coffee shop where God, again in the form of a graying Robin Williams, gives Nathan a list of authors, many secular, who will give him a more balanced and healthy view of spirituality, beyond what the Bible can teach. He orders him to take a sabbatical to his cabin in Doe County to get his spiritual house more in order. How about some of the characters? A couple of characters from my 2011 novel A Conscientious Life appear as cameos in the book, like psychiatrist Dr. Andrew Lippert and nature writer Margaret Lathrop. Nathan's friend Willie Sunder presents an interesting contrast to religion and tells Nathan that he simply comes to church for the people, especially for the sharing of the peace. He doesn't actually believe in God but believes that God can be a metaphor for kindness, love, understanding and ethical purity. He respects that. Willie writes letters to the local newspaper based on his humanistic views. Nathan understands Willie's many questions and his intense intellectual honesty but refuses to completely agree with his unique and somewhat inappropriate statements. Willie later shows us in dramatic fashion that the meaning of his friendship and loyalty to Nathan is more than any words can say. It was very intentional that I had an atheist save the pastor's life. One of the pastor character's strongest arcs is his awakening involving a gradual gravitation to the Unitarian faith, a path to faith with less guilt and perhaps more love. He grows by learning to think for himself and to direct his life the way it should be based on his own conscience. He retains a strong respect for the teachings of Jesus Christ. This is similar to my journey. As a youth, my family only attended church for about 2 years, and that was a Unitarian church. Besides that, there was no church involved in my upbringing. To this day, I am proud of my parents raising my brother Scott, sister Sarah and I with a healthy sense of free and critical thinking. We've always been taught to be suspect about non-rational ideas and to see the advantage of objective and critical thinking in every decision we make. I have a gigantic amount of respect for my parents, showing me that there is much decency in being an ethical atheist. To this day I would describe myself as an agnostic person leaning towards the Unitarian side. I also firmly believe, like the pastor, that Jesus possessed amazing character and morals. I would invite my readers to check out a book by the late Reverend Charles Jefferson on the character of Jesus that was written in the early 1900s. The book is free to read online. It remains a very inspiration book for me. I still have strong hope and faith, but it's different than the traditional Christian definition. In this sense, the minister's spiritual quest is very much parallel to my own. The pastor believes more strongly as the novel progresses that there were many amazing teachers for mankind in history, including Jesus Christ, the Buddha, Confucius, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. He still feels a special connection with Jesus that his soul cannot hide. The key is to never stop searching, to always look for the beautiful and mysterious in everything we do in life. I believe we can always be curious like children no matter what our ages are, because life is full of beautiful questions and great challenges. The biggest challenge is to find love, hope, faith and meaning. But as Jesus once said, the most important concept is love. At the end of the book, the pastor fully engages with this all-encompassing love, a love that is all around us all of the time. The pastor gains an infinite kind of respect for the numinous, with or without God. At the same time he possesses a love for Jesus that he cannot explain away. His love, gratitude and appreciation for the mystery of life grows more intense throughout the novel, and the spirits he witnesses have a lot to do with this. Here are some quick reflections about some more of the book's characters. Johnny Cranston is the mild-mannered and friendly church maintenance man. He is always urging the pastor to challenge his limits and to never to forget to preach about love. He encourages Nathan saying if he speaks with love and passion, He can do no wrong. In Cranston's everyman character, we see the immense goodness and potential for virtue in the common man. Pastor Simon sees this clearly and highly values his friend. He sees Cranston as a highly valuable companion, mentor and father figure. The character Victor Munn is symbolic of extremist political tendencies and irrational racist and Islamophobic right-wing reactionary behavior that we are seeing more and more of these days. He perhaps mirrors the misunderstanding and vitriol of an ignorant, angry and self-centered person, one who may vote out of anger not reason. This narrow-minded worldview of Mr. Mann's causes him to be more and more upset and frustrated as he grows older. As the novel later explains, Mann's growing anger and existential crisis results in an intense personal catastrophe and eventually leads toward a homicide. It may surprise even my closest friends and family that crafting a book like this only tended to solidify my own liberal spiritual philosophy and tendency towards agnosticism. Although I may pay a price for this kind of transparent honesty, I believe that a richly spiritual life may be able to exist without a God, that love and truth could exist without a God, and that ethics can be strongest in those who don't need the 10 Commandments or other rules to keep them in line. What I want to say in the book is that it's not one's definition of God that counts in the end, but it's more about recognizing that love and truth are the most important ideals for human beings to strive for always. I want the reader to see that love and truth can be the fundamental building blocks for a new kind of spirituality. Morality should be built from deep within us and not from outside sources. There is not 100% proof of God, and if we were to find a God, which God would it be? The Christian, Hindu or the Muslim God? The God of Spinoza? The Baha'i God? I fervently believe in the great power of human heart, and the potential of this human race to improve in its compassion, love and wisdom. We surely must be learning through all of mankind's struggles and foibles throughout history. History has proven that religion has not always been kind, and as Christopher Hitchens would say with vim and vigor, it has the potential to poison everything. Hopefully, mankind is learning slowly that we can peacefully live together and help each other with love and kindness, without the necessity of a celestial ruler who can read our minds. At the same time, I think it is vitally important to learn to deeply and profoundly respect people who believe in a personal God who aids and comforts them during difficult times in their lives. My great Christian friend and author, Craig Sather, gave many kind suggestions about the content and structure of the book, and frankly, he had a profound effect on the book's surprise twist at the very end. He openly admits that he wishes I would have crafted a novel about a man who finds more in common with Christian Brotherhood rather than reaching out to free thinking and many liberal ideas. I respect that greatly, and some people on the left will be frustrated with what the pastor decides to believe in at the end of the book. I believe that is part of the real power of the book. Everyone can fashion their own interpretation. I always love to hear people share about God, because when they do, they often talk about their best selves. When my friend Tom talks about the grand creation of God and the magnificent miracle of life and nature, his eyes light up and it makes me smile. Life is complex and full of contradictions. What a wonderful and beautiful journey we all have the privilege to take part in. One of my great intellectual heroes has been and forever will be the great Christopher Hitchens. He was famous for what were called the God debates in the early 2000s. The questions in these debates on the existence or non-existence of God embody the substance of my main character's sudden confusion and disillusionment about religion and its established rules. Hitchens, the outspoken and sometimes eccentric writer, speaker and philosopher, passed away too soon in 2011, of esophageal cancer, but his unique blend of moral courage, intense intellectual stamina and truly incredible speaking and writing talents have made a large, lasting and indelible impression on my life. A writer for The Economist once commented that Hitchens was on a short list as one of the greatest living conversationalists in English. He was described by the same writer as having great brilliance, fantastic powers of recall and quick wit. An online reviewer claimed he was most interesting because of his powerful love affair with the delights and the seductions of the English language. Well said. In a YouTube video from 2007, Christopher wisely pointed out that cognitive dissonance is present in every single human being to a certain degree, leading to contradictions that we must all face and consciously live with. I thought it would be incredibly interesting to have the minister in my story battle with this dissonance. In the novel, we see his confusion intensify the more he examines his life more closely. He realizes that, as Emerson once stated, that an unexamined life is not worth living, and this causes great emotional pain. The biggest question perhaps is whether or not morality can just exist, as Hitchens expresses, solely in the brotherhood of man, or does there have to be a God for morality to have any foundation whatsoever? This question looms ominous for our minister. Hitchens himself was a living example of this cognitive dissonance. He was a fiery and sometimes brash orator in public, but according to many, a kind and sensitive friend to those who knew him best. Many of his closest personal friends were Christians. He was intensely interested in, as I am, in the dichotomy between scientific and faith-based thinking. Biographer Larry Alex Taunton calls him a great friend, but candidly reveals that the master writer and speaker also kept two sets of books, one public and one private, implying that the man was somewhat of a living contradiction. As you will see in my novel, through the main character, one's inner life oftentimes differs radically from the public persona one projects. According to the encyclopedia, the term cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort, psychological stress, experienced by a person who simultaneously holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values. The occurrence of cognitive dissonance is a consequence of a person's performing an action that contradicts personal beliefs, ideals, and values, and also occurs when confronted with new information that contradicts said beliefs, ideals, and values. A prime example of such dissonance can be found in one's attempt to reconcile faith thinking and scientific thinking. The faith thinking paradigm often assumes the answer before proof. The scientific way humbly accumulates enough knowledge before assuming any kind of truth. It plods along without making any such assumptions. It is my opinion that the complex human mind is capable of both kinds of thinking at the same time, and that is where the potential danger lies. As I see it, it is a matter of being honest with ourselves and with others, and with these two kinds of thinking going on simultaneously, it makes it infinitely more difficult to achieve truth and wisdom. This problem of dissonance is certainly not only a rocky and arduous challenge for intellectuals to explain, but can catch us all by surprise at certain points in our lives. Hitchens solved the dissonance question by asserting a strong stance against believing in any higher power. He stated, "The only position that leaves me with no cognitive dissonance is atheism. It is not a creed. Death is certain, replacing both the siren song of paradise and the dread of hell. Life on this earth, with all its mystery and beauty and pain, is then to be lived far more intensely. We stumble and get up. We are sad, confident, insecure, feel loneliness, and joy and love. There is nothing more, but I want nothing more." Perhaps all that Hitchens was saying was that when we can be humble enough to admit this cognitive dissonance, it can and will help us in profound and important ways. I believe Hitchens tried to show us this kind of intellectual honesty in order to elucidate the power of truth in our lives. Cognitive dissonance is manifested in the pastor in our history when he is unsure if his sermons are truly as effective and meaningful as they could be. Is faith comparable to hope and imagination, or is it closer to a form of spiritual truth? Is he merely deciding to believe something enough, or does it have to be supported with facts? I am a lover of quotations and have literally loaded the pages of this book with my favorite quotes and even some passages from the Bible. Nathan's sense of doubt increases, and he more and more wonders why he has to depend so much on an irrational God for meaning in his life. My life has somewhat mirrored this sense of separation and alienation from the many rules and expectations of organized religion. I currently attend a Lutheran church, but mainly because of my wife's wishes. I remain a Unitarian at heart, far from the rules of conventional religion, believing strongly in higher forms of ethics and spirituality, but with no strict definitions attached. The most important concepts for me personally are love and truth. In some profound sense, Perhaps this book could be an author's attempt at a kind of personal redemption, a courageous act of being more intellectually honest with myself and others. It is my greatest hope that my book will help people understand their own spiritual foundations to a greater depth, so they will gain the courage, like our pastor, to examine their own long held beliefs with a greater sense of perspective, objectivity, and compassion. The pastor comes to realize that the building blocks for rebuilding his spirituality are the concepts of love and truth, and that everything else pales in comparison. The visions that the pastor witnesses tell him that religion must change drastically while keeping those essential and sacred building blocks fully intact. Thanks to the great writers who have encouraged me to search for the truth, keeping my flame of desire alive to become a better author. My primary motivators include the late Christopher Hitchens, C.S. Lewis, William Paul Young, James Baldwin, Jordan Peterson, Elizabeth Strout, Anne Lamott, John Updike, Philip Roth, Sam Harris, Randy Pausch, Carlton Pearson, Ray Bradbury, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Sam Keen, Leo Biscaglia, John Updike, Wayne Dyer, Chris Hedges, and many others. Thanks most of all to my wife and my life's love, Debbie, for her patience with my passion for writing. I thank her for giving me the freedom to be productive with my creative projects and most importantly, to let me be the best I can be. I am not always able to adequately explain to her the great depth and intentions of my writing projects, but I feel her full and unconditional support all of the time. This is truly a gift. She is the most important person in my life. I am a very lucky man. I could not do it without her. As Dan Brown's scientist/protagonist character, Edmund Kirsch, in the novel Origin states, transformation is always preceded by upheaval and fear, and I urge you to place your faith in the human capacity for creativity and love. In my book, one of the themes is the importance of finding the wisdom to recognize love and truth. The greatest question I would like to ask the reader after completing my book would be, did Pastor Nathan lose or regain his faith at the end of the novel? Is he still essentially a Christian? Feel free to contact me directly if you would like to discuss the book. I'll be interested in your response. Feel free to contact me through my website at jeffreymcandrew.wordpress.com. On Twitter, you can find me at Jaifa549 or @McAndrew. On Facebook, it's https://www.facebook.com/group/81130687227822803/. Thank you for taking the time to read my novel. I hope you enjoyed it. Book Club Study Questions. Why did the author pick a minister to manifest such deep philosophical questions? What is the meaning of the 3 ghosts and the 4 visions that the minister experiences? Why did the author choose to have an atheist save the minister's life? Why did God first appear to Pastor Nathan as an atheist? Why do you think the author picked Christopher Hitchens? What was the significance of the pastor's conversion to Unitarianism? Were you surprised by the unexpected twist at the end of the book? Why does Nathan still place so much faith in Jesus? Have your thoughts on spirituality ever changed? How have they changed? Is an unexamined life not worth living? What does it mean to get one's spiritual house in order? Why is it important to have a spiritual mentor such as Jesus Christ, Allah, or the Buddha? Does Nathan retain or lose his faith? In what ways does he grow? In what ways is he still confused? This concludes Numinous by Jeffrey C. McAndrew. I hope you've enjoyed listening.